It is time for our weekly water cooler conversation, and we are talking Loki. Now, Loki is perhaps my favorite of the pilots, but as always, you need to have seen the first episode of Loki. This is the first week back to these weekly water cooler conversations, so it'll obviously be just spoilers for this one episode. We're going to be going through Easter eggs, we're going to be going through comic references, we're going to be going through theories, we're going to be diving into all of the goodness that was the God of Mischief's first episode. I am very excited to do this with you guys. I've missed you. I know these weekly conversations were a very big part of all of our lives. So many people sent me messages saying, like, when's the next one? When's the next one? Only a month ago that we did the glory that was Falcon, now Captain America and the Winter Soldier. But now we are back with some Loki goodness. Let's dive on into perhaps my favorite pilot of them all. I loved where WandaVision went, and I think it delivered exactly the show it set out to make. I loved what Falcon and Winter Soldier was able to achieve in that buddy cop goodness with a very important moral and ethical center. But I feel like both of those shows definitely had to deal with the coronavirus pacing and missing some episodes here and there. I'm thinking Loki, with its theoretically already secretly filmed second season, may get to deliver on its very bold launching point. Loki is able to, in one beautiful show, clean up any continuity ever. You can actually have anything be retroactively justified in a really fun way. I've always enjoyed the character of Loki quite a bit. I think he is the first great Marvel villain. I think he has really established himself as there's a reason he's been here for 10 years. But you definitely have some moments of inconsistency with the character that are able to be written out thanks to his being the God of Mischief. But there are definitely different characterizations of Loki that have felt very tricky, especially considering how long we've known the character. This, and the concept of variance and the concept of time travel, allows you to have a very different look at that. Now, we're obviously going to have Skrulls very soon. We're going to have potentially life model decoys, which were teased in this first episode. We're going to have a lot more of the what is reality concept hitting a lot of Phase 4, Phase 5, and beyond. But this show, this episode, I think really establishes how much you can see a character change in their fate versus their choice. So we saw in this episode the events after Avengers that ended up turning Loki into a more benevolent God of Mischief happen in real time. And through the power of Tom Hiddleston's acting, we saw him grow from evil manipulator of cruel, bow before me human beings, Mewling Quinn Loki, into I will actually sacrifice myself for the betterment of people and family and all of those things Loki. Through the course of one scene, we saw him make those decisions and in real time realize who he was. Through lines of dialogue, not action, dialogue through two incredible actors, we saw humility, humbleness, and a realization about one's purpose. This show is so well written, so well directed, so well acted. One of my favorite Pixar movies of all time, Soul, is about accepting sometimes what you're meant for. Like, sometimes you can't do that thing. Sometimes that isn't going to work out. You should always fight hard. You should always be happy. You should always aspire for greatness. You should always go for it. But there is a point where that might not be what you're meant to do. This show handled that very complex narrative, that very complex concept, and basically gave us a Loki that realized in one episode that he wasn't in fact meant to rule, he was meant to show others their potential. That is an impossibility. That is such an impossible concept to land, and they did it in a 10-minute scene of dialogue, and then they further solidified it through the actions taking place after. You're going to disbelieve that about yourself. You're going to have moments of, no, that can't be me. I'm a god. I am meant to rule. And they were able to land that through flashbacks, through dialogue, through tiny bits of action. This show also, by the way, looks so expensive. I was rewatching some parts of Phase 1, and it's incredible how much this world has grown, and the production design on this is on par with any $300 million movie. I mean, WandaVision gave us a Pleasantville supernatural jaunt through sitcoms. Falcon Winter Soldier gave us the biggest action sequences, some of the biggest action sequences I've ever seen on TV. This is giving us some of the most textured and beautiful worlds that look like a Jack Kirby drawing, that look like a Mobius drawing. Mobius is an iconic comic book artist, a French artist that passed away about 10 years ago, a genius of immersive alien technology. Mobius, the character, clearly referencing Mobius in many ways, is a nod to that, and he's one of the people that gave us the richness of alien technology. And that look through the window, that beautiful look through the window, is this nod to both Mobius and Kirby. Kirby obviously being one of the godfathers of Marvel, one of the Rushmore heads of what Marvel Comics became, one of the reasons Marvel Comics is what it is today. So that love letter to Kirby and Mobius. We finally live in a world where everything's getting bigger and bigger and bigger to an exponential degree. There is so much to be gleaned from this, because now the sky's the limit and beyond. There's obviously a very, very tangible world of Marvel, and then we have the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now we're expanding beyond even the Guardians. We have Infinity Stones being used as paperweights, which was a beautiful metaphor for the power structure shifting at Marvel, which I think is absolutely genius. My overall thoughts are this is one of, if not the best pilot for a comic book show I've ever seen. This is some of the best dialogue I've seen with very big concepts. I described it as Terry Gilliam meets Mad Men meets Fincher with a dash of The Good Place. It is so dense, so smart, and it trusts its audience. It believes in its audience to know what good filmmaking is. It believes in its actors to convey lots of depth and emotion. And to be honest, this is some of the best work I've seen from a very formidable Owen Wilson. Owen Wilson is a very funny guy, and I feel like a lot of people, when they think of someone as funny, kind of separate that from incredible dramatic chops. But there's so much drama in comedy. He does such good work, especially with Wes Anderson. And I think this is really going to surprise a lot of people. He was able to convey, you're not a god of ruling, you're a god of potential for others. You boost others, you shape things, and the dialogue is not easy to have to, all with that Owen Wilson charm, that Texas drawl, that supportive nature of jovialness. There's so much to Owen Wilson, and this was perfectly cast. I was excited for Owen Wilson in a Marvel show just because I love those two things, and two great tastes can taste great together. But now I see why this was the right role for Owen Wilson in the MCU. Perfectly delivered. No one else, I think, could have done that. It was genius. Give me more of this show. Basically, the you can rebuild, fix, update anything in continuity through the show is genius. The opening of Burdened with Glorious Purpose, where he like jumps on the rocks and he kind of like presents himself to the folks right after that time jump in 2012, was a really fun reminder of where we left off with that Loki. This is not our Loki. This isn't Thor Dark World Loki. This isn't Thor Ragnarok Loki. This is certainly not Avengers Endgame Loki. This is the God of Mischief that we last saw demanding people bow to him, and Captain America saying last time people demanded people to bow, it didn't go well for them. This is that 9 years ago Loki, and it's really interesting to put ourselves back in that headspace as we've grown a decade with this character, and Marvel does such a good job reminding us why we like characters, reminding us how they've changed, and then putting us back in that in no time. So really impressive jump, and it also shows what they can do with this show. They can really change everything as far as a character's mindset, as far as characterizations, as far as fixing plot holes. They can really navigate that, and they can do it in universe so it doesn't feel cliche. If you look at the TVA, they address the fact that the Marvel characters that are heroes messed with continuity tons. They literally messed with the timeline over and over again to solve the problem, but that was, as according to the TVA's own rules, what they were meant to do. Now, the TVA, in my opinion, are going to end up being villains. I think there is something about an authority of any kind that is perhaps my own rebelling against authority, but anytime I hear the word authority, I'm like, So the TVA, I think, will end up being villains, but I do think that the TVA itself is a bit of a fascist state. They're demanding this is the only timeline. They're saying this is the way or no way. They're taking people out of continuity effectively. They are I mean, it's an Easter egg. Comics Code Authority, TVA, is a very thin line. You can see where it's going. We're talking Easter eggs in just a second, but it is one very clear my way or the highway. So I think that the TVA are setting themselves up to be villains disguised as heroes in this opening because we need structure. Structure is important, but my way or no way is problematic, and that's how, fascist states begin. So I do think this is a great way to, yes, it solves the why weren't you watching, why didn't you change things with the Avengers problem, which they address with dialogue, but it also is going to address a lot of other continuity, and we're going to get a lot of spin-offs from this. We've already heard from Kevin Feige that we're going to get basically different versions of characters we know and love through this show. So this gives us infinite, this is almost a what-if level opportunity to see infinite options with these characters. We already know we're going to see multiple Lokis. I would not be surprised if we see alternate versions of characters we know and love, perhaps dead ones, perhaps characters we thought we'd lost that we will now get back. I personally would love to see Heimdall. I would love to see Idris Elba again in the MCU. Very tired today. This episode is brought to you by Dunkin' Donuts. But I do think there will be an ability to solve continuity, solve a lot of issues going forward with storytelling and plot holes. All right, let's talk some Easter eggs. My favorite Easter egg, I think, is a very, very subtle one. It is a very silly one, but the designation of which Loki this was on that one Minuteman, the lead Minuteman woman who was basically brutal to Loki the whole time, that was trying to erase him from continuity. The Loki that was designated on her board was Loki 4.01. Now, in most Easter eggs, you think comic books, so what issue is that? Now, that's issue 401 by any logic. So Thor 401 is basically an issue about Loki, the trickster god, doing a wager. The wager of will they survive, won't they survive, is basically addressed at the jump with the comic book of Loki. So that is a tricky one. It might or may not relate, but what makes me think it relates is that whole issue takes place 1,000 years in the past. So a Loki versus Thor issue that takes place 1,000 years in the past, I think that's what they're referencing-ish if they're using comics, but more, I think it's a April Fool's reference. 4.01, the fourth month, first day, the trickster god, god of mischief, the most mischievous day of the year. I think it's an April Fool's reference. I think it's my favorite Easter egg in the episode. As far as fun little surface ones, there's some deep cuts here, but I think an April Fool's joke is lovely to have in a show about the god of mischief. We've also got the sequence where we see the gems and timelines represented with continuities. So I think they handled it really well, having that animated sequence kind of describe continuity and timelines clashing. But in the comic books, in most comic book continuities, the Infinity Gems themselves represent past universes. So imploded universe, different universes, alternate universes, the gems themselves can represent those. So it was really interesting to have timelines represented in the colors of the Infinity Gems, because in a way those timelines represent different alternate universes, just as the comics reference the gems themselves as different alternate universes. It's interesting to see those, since in the movies and like the MCU as a whole, the gems have never been seen as anything like that. Now obviously there are different gems in each set of universes, as we see with the paperweight joke, but I don't think we've ever seen the concept of the gems themselves be a past imploded or anything universe going forward. The third millennia reference is probably my favorite comic book reference in the episode. Now, the April Fool's thing is funny for like, haha, but the third millennia is where that weapon came from. The weapon that concludes the episode with the oil moment, which is also a genius little reference, is from the third millennia, aka the 3000s, aka where Kang is from. Kang, the conqueror of the third millennia, is coming. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. This is, I think, our first Kang reference in the entire MCU. Kang has been cast. I would not be surprised if we get Kang by the end of this. I had assumed it would be a little later till we got Kang, but they're playing with time travel. It's the TVA. I would not be surprised if Kang happens very soon. Episode 4, maybe. The year 3000, the land of Kang. Yes, please. And that also gives us our first Richards, as Kang is directly related to Reed Richards, which will bring us the Fantastic Four very, very soon. Very excited. Yes, the Lady Judge is Kang's ex, and they are referencing time travel and all of those things. So there is very much another reference to Kang by way of this character playing the ex of Kang as the Judge Reinholder is very exciting as well. But seeing the weapon from the year 3000 filled my nerd heart with so much glee. The Drawer of Secrets with all those Infinity Gems. Yes, they had a lot of Infinity Gems. I think the Mind Stone was missing. I didn't see. There was one color missing, and it was quick, but I think it was the Mind Stone, but there was lots and lots of Time Stones. If you're going to play with time continuity, if you're going to mess with time, the one you'd see most commonly as a TVA would probably be the Time Stone. Thought that was clever to have the Time Stone be the most frequent recurring of the stones. I love seeing all the Time Stones. It would make sense as far as which of them you'd see most often in that job. But the fun little Easter egg in there beyond the stones, there's a bunch of other miscellaneous things, but there was also Honus Wagner, which is the most expensive baseball card of all time. Honus Wagner baseball card would be the thing you would steal. It's like getting an Amazing Fantasy 15, or it's like stealing an old lottery ticket. What a great little Easter egg to time travelers trying to profit. Very clever. And something someone would keep in that position at the Time Variance Authority. We've also got, when we meet Renslayer, the judge, I really, really like the number references they do here. So she references that the violation number is 72089. Now, again, with the April Fool's reference, since this is a show about time, a little less about comic books. So that's why I don't think it's referencing that Thor issue. I do think it's referencing time because the show is about time. 7/20/89, I imagine, would be referencing July. So July 20th, 1989. So if you look at July 20th, 1989, you look, and the comic book around then in the world of Thor was with Fantastic Four, which obviously ties us right into Kang, and it also features the Negative Zone, which I think is going to be how we introduce the Fantastic Four, and Mount Wundagore is also featured in that Thor number 405, and that was referenced in WandaVision. So all of these things, and that will be referenced in Doctor Strange, which is also in Phase 4. This is basically a giant summation of everything in Phase 4. The Negative Zone, Kang the Conqueror, the Fantastic Four, Mount Wundagore, all referenced in one time reference. A show about time says the violation is 7/20/89. Genius. Brilliant. I love an Easter egg that gives you all of that sauce in one line of dialogue. Thank you, Marvel Comics. We've also got the reference to Nexus events. We talked at length about Nexus and how important that word was in WandaVision. I lost my mind when I heard the word Nexus. Nexus in the MCU had previously been only a comic book reference in the sense of it's an all-reaching concept, and they used it as a computer in Age of Ultron. A computer that was able to basically connect to all forms of the internet that Ultron basically tried to take over the world through. It kind of makes sense. Time connects all, computer connects all. It was very tenuous as far as like how cool Nexus beings are in the comic books. I was really afraid they'd throw away that concept with Age of Ultron, and I remember being really bummed to hear Nexus used that way, and then boom, WandaVision comes out, and they have her taking a pill called Nexus, and that kind of stifles her abilities because it's an antidepressant that tempers things, and that more directly correlates to the comic books, where a Nexus being is one who's able to control space-time. A Nexus being is an all-powerful, omniscient, omnipresent being, and a Nexus event is when one of those beings does alter things. So hearing Nexus again in this concept, they're pretty much course-correcting how important the word Nexus is to Marvel Comics. So using Nexus here, Nexus being, Nexus with WandaVision, Nexus with this show, straight from the comics, nailing the concept, bringing it back to the continuity it's meant to be in. The TVA, I talked about briefly earlier. The TVA is an Easter egg in the sense that the Time Variance Authority is pretty much a commentary from within Marvel on the authority that was controlling them, which was the Comics Code Authority. They have since and often at times left the Comics Code Authority, notably with the drug issues with Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. The Comics Code Authority was like, you can't talk about drugs, and Marvel's like, no, we need to save kids' lives, and they're like, no drugs in comics, and Marvel's like, well, screw you, Comics Code Authority, we outie. So Marvel was aware of the authoritative state of what the Comics Code Authority was, and they've got that little badge that used to be in a lot of your comics, that little CCA that went in various corners of your comic books. It was a mark of this is allowed, and Marvel got rid of it. They are no longer a part of that Comics Code Authority. I would bet they didn't like it very much being under someone else's regime. So I've always thought the TVA was a thinly veiled making fun of and dealing with the fascism of an authority figure. The TVA to me is effectively, especially at that little symbol, that little badge, a commentary on another authority. So that leads me to believe this will be a villain and an oppressive regime within the series. If you're a comic book creator writing against something, you're going to write some shit about what you know. The TVA, I think, will prove to be very, very negative, and anyone calling themselves an authority tends to have a little bit of an ego on them, and they tend to be a little bit my way or the highway, which we've already seen the TVA to be, so I really like that they're leaning all the way in the TVA. Now, the Minutemen in the comic books first appeared in the Fantastic Four, and they were robots. They were, in fact, different from the other agents of the TVA, because the other agents in the TVA were clones of our guy Mobius. So we'll get to that in a second because it's very dense. But Minutemen in the Fantastic Four were robots. So I'm wondering if, since all of these TVA agents don't look like our guy, Mr. Owen Wilson, if they're going to turn out to be robots, because we did have a lot of robot commentary in that sequence with Loki. So I think that robot commentary of whether or not he's a robot, and that great question of like, how would I know I'm real? Am I real? What would a robot think of themselves? That fun little existential dread for 2 seconds was delightful. But beyond that, I do think we're going to be laying the groundwork for robots and for commentaries on life model decoys and all of those things going forward. So I think these Minutemen might be robots, especially since there's comic book continuity to suggest it, as that's what they were then. Now, let's talk about the clones for a second. So, in the comic books, the TVA agents were clones of our main guy, Mobius. And Mobius, in a really fun way, was referencing Grunwald, who is an incredibly important editor-in-chief and continuity expert at Marvel. You've heard me say that name before because they referenced him multiple times in both WandaVision and Falcon Winter Soldier, and he was in fact name-dropped in Falcon Winter Soldier, and he's also the guy that pretty much got us. Agent Walker is responsible for so many horrible things, and he basically invented that character, so he's very essential to this next Phase 4, so I love that they basically modeled the look of Owen Wilson's Mobius after Grunwald, who is so important to Marvel. Like, they're doing a great job of giving us our Stan Lees and our Kirbys and all those things, but also the editors-in-chiefs and the below-the-line people that a lot of people never knew the names of are getting some love. So they modeled Mobius after Grunwald. So they made Mobius a visual clone of Grunwald, and that's a fun reference because in the comic books, everyone is a clone of Mobius. So they kind of gave us a little love letter to not only an editor-in-chief, but the concept of cloning by making him a replicant completely visually of the character. Another brilliantly clever, multifaceted Easter egg for us comic book fans. In the file, we got a Loki file, very briefly. I really liked 2 things in there. One, it's a sex fluid, so not male, female, fluid. Loki, god of mischief, he will appear in many ways in this show. I think not only is it very important representation, but I also think it's laying the groundwork for Lady Loki. So being gender fluid is a reality that we've not addressed in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's also an opportunity to allow us to not assume a character is coming that I think is coming. I'm thinking the hooded character that Loki that we got at the end of the show is Lady Loki. I think we're getting Lady Loki, and I think that was the first little you might not anticipate this coming moment. So keep an eye out for that. The other little Easter egg in Loki's file was a very, very fun Sector 1900 through 2099. If you're a comic book fan, the year 2099 means everything to you. I very, very hope to live to be 111 years old. 1, it'll be beautiful to see 111. It'll be fun to write. 2, that means I'm alive in 2099. I want to live to at least 2099 because that is the year of all of the insanity of Marvel's 90s 2099 imprint. Spider-Man 2099 was briefly referenced in the Spider-Verse. There's a lot of people that love that entire continuity. It's completely separate from Marvel, and then it was so beloved it actually crossed over. Peter Parker of our years crossed over with the incredible Spider-Man 2099. Miguel O'Hara is one of my favorite alternate Spider-Mans. He's fantastic. I love the 2099 stuff. So just seeing those 4 numbers in sequence in a file warmed my nerdy heart. 2099, I think the first reference in the MCU was in fact in this file. If you've never read any of that imprint, check out Spider-Man 2099. It is a goddamn good time. All right, now let's talk about Oklahoma, where the wind blows gently down the plain. Salina, Oklahoma is very, very painstakingly name-dropped in this for a very fun time reason. Salina, Oklahoma is where oil was discovered the year after they do it in the show. So that moment with the Minuteman smelling the oil saying it's probably just someone trying to get rich is very clever because if you get a time machine, you're going to want to go where you know oil is, discover it first, make all the money, change everything. You change industry. Oil is, I mean, Unfortunately, 150 years later, still an essential in our country and all over the world. Oil is vital. But it is fascinating that we go to the year before it was discovered. That person makes all the leaps and everything else. So if you don't know your history, it is where, in fact, oil was discovered, and it was just the year before. In comic book history, Oklahoma, about an hour away from Salinas, Oklahoma, I believe it's in Broxton, Oklahoma, is where the reborn Asgard was built. There was an Asgard that floated over the earth after Asgard was destroyed in Oklahoma in the 2000s Thor comics. So it might not happen, but Asgard was just destroyed in Ragnarok. They're going to need a new Asgard. They just landed in Oklahoma. It's not likely they're going to make a reborn Asgard in Oklahoma, but what a fun little nod and what a great coincidence that one state, about an hour away from where they first discovered oil, they were able to give us a comic book reference. So a real-life time variance reference and a real-life comic book reference in one beautiful little inserted text. Thank you. Thank you, Marvel. Thank you. Sacred Timeline. This is a stretch. I will own it. I will admit it. But since everyone likes to talk about X-Men, the Sacred Timeline concept always makes me think of Bolivar Trask. And Bolivar Trask had a daughter who watched over timelines. She was Madam Sanctity. So when they talk about sacred timelines, I always think of Madam Sanctity. She's not in a lot of comics. She's not a big character, but she was responsible for timelines because Cable obviously dealt with a lot of time travel. Bolivar Trask's daughter over in X-Men was guardian of the timeline. So there is some comic book history between Cable, the X-Men, and the concepts they're beginning to dabble with. We won't have X-Men for some time. I would say 5 or 7 years until we've got any X-Men goodness. I do think setting up little moments like this are fun. They're basically just grabbing all sorts of time travel stuff from all the comic books. It reminded me of that arc over there. That is going to do it for Easter eggs. 1549 Mephisto moment. I had to bring it up because of how much I really did think Mephisto is coming. The moment WandaVision started, episode 1, I was one of the people that was a problem. I was yelling very loudly about Mephisto from the moment I saw Emma. I was like, yo, Mephisto. The way the character is portrayed, the history of Mephisto with Wanda, all of it led me to believe that was the thing. And then you read the interviews after the show wraps, and Catherine Hahn didn't even know Mephisto was the character from the comic books until, all the Easter eggs and fandom. It was insane how much we as fans, we went there. But then Loki gives us a goddamn Mephisto in a window in a church. I mean, come on. Now, in reality, it's probably a child seeing Loki with the full horns of his comic book costume that we've seen in Avengers. It is much more likely that it's Loki, because that's the villain story they're setting up, is alternate versions of Loki. But I have to acknowledge the Mephisto in the room, and the Mephisto in the room was in the stained glass window. God damn it, Mephisto. Why has Mephisto got to chase me through every one of these goddamn shows? I'm not even that big of a fan of Mephisto in the comic books because I think it's really messy when you mix continuities, and I hated what Mephisto did with Spider-Man. I think One More Day is one of the worst Spider-Man stories of all time. I don't particularly enjoy Mephisto, but now with 3 shows in a row, I mean, at this point, Mephisto's got to be in Phase 5, just out of sheer, atrophy from the fans losing their minds and wearing them down. Anyway, probably not Mephisto, had to talk about it. D.B. Cooper was one of the funniest things Marvel has done with real continuity. In reality, D.B. Cooper stole $200,000. The press dubbed him D.B. Cooper. We never identified D.B. Cooper. What would be more fun in losing a bet than the God of Mischief confusing humans forever than stealing $200,000, never being identified, and never being a trace of you found? They haven't found D.B. Cooper in all these years. It was genius to use the Rainbow Bridge for that. It was genius for the marketing team to make it look like that moment with the Rainbow Bridge was some crazy action set piece. Instead, it was a moment that was a joke setting up different timelines and how the Time Variance Authority has some wiggle. That scene was basically just to show, hey, we don't always intervene, but if it's a big enough deal, we do. Sometimes it's okay for the timeline. That was an okay for the timeline, little bit of mischief. D.B. Cooper being Loki, with how much Tom Hiddleston looks like him, with all of the fun of the Mad Men references, because this show has clearly been referenced and influenced by Mad Men. There were so many people on the internet, just like what we've been doing at these Marvel shows, that thought Don Draper was going to turn out to be D.B. Cooper. It was early days of the internet, but there were thousands of people that swore up and down Don Draper would turn out to be D.B. Cooper, and that's how Mad Men would end. So in a show, influenced by Mad Men, they bring back the fun little reference to Don Draper being D.B. Cooper with an actor that looks like D.B. Cooper that allows us to further the plot of the TVA by using D.B. Cooper in Marvel Universe, in Marvel continuity, to explain away one of America's weird obsessions. Genius writing. That is so many layers. It's comic reference layers, it is plot furthering, it gives us so many moments of levity while also referencing the things it's referencing in canon. That is what comic books do. It is meta to the nth degree without being fourth wall breaking. It is everything you want out of an Easter egg in one beautiful 2-minute sequence. I don't even have a hat big enough to tip. Genius. Thank you very much, D.B. Cooper and Marvel and Kevin Feige and Tom Hiddleston and everyone that made this possible. Thank you. All right, we've also got the kind of locks in S.H.I.E.L.D. as not being canon, no. This kind of locks in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. not being canon. We've kind of changed what the TV at Marvel is. The TV at Marvel, when it was under Jeff Loeb, had Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. while also having Netflix, while also having little pockets like The Runaways on Hulu. There were a lot of different continuities that tied into the TV side of Marvel that didn't quite get referenced in the movies. Yes, there were moments where like Lady Sif would pop up, or where you'd see the helicarrier and they would all tie into Winter Soldier. There were moments, but overall that was kind of one way. The shows would reference the movies, but the movies wouldn't often reference the shows. To me, they didn't acknowledge that Coulson was in fact not dead. It would have been a single line of dialogue of saying, not actually, or you don't know everything, or like something to allude to it without being a long chunk of monologue. They could have, I think, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is not canon. Coulson died to me in Avengers, and that made them avenge him. If you have a character that repeatedly comes back, it loses a lot of the oomph, which is why it's so fun to have Loki get his comeuppance with not dying in 2012, but he did die in 2019. Loki, our continuity, stayed dead. This Loki, being from an alternate timeline, allows us to have our cake and eat it too. For my money, Coulson died in the movie. I never got into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as much as a lot of people did. So it was really interesting that they just called out that moment. I do think that this is the proper TV continuity. I think it's an alternate universe where Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. takes place. I think Runaways and the Netflix universe probably are alternate universes, which we can play with since we're living in a multiverse world. But I would acknowledge that the Marvel Cinematic Universe probably is more towards these TV shows than the old TV shows, just in my opinion. No disrespect to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans whatsoever. I know a lot of people love that show. I have nothing against that show. It just wasn't for me. Love the Judge calling him Laufeyson. Laufeyson would both put him down, acknowledge the disparity between him and Thor as an Odinson, and also it's something we hadn't heard before, so it humanized him in a very interesting way. Laufeyson, with just one expression, changed how we acknowledge the character of Loki. Loki very much considered himself Odinson many times, but did make decisions that took him out of the family. He loved his mother. He, in his own way, loved his father. He loves his brother in his own way. We saw that in this episode, but he's not an Odinson, so they call him Laufeyson. He doesn't want to acknowledge that he's the son of an ice giant, frost giant. He doesn't want to think of himself as that genetics. He doesn't want to think of himself from that hereditary. So it was really interesting to see that moment of putting him down in its own way that makes him, it belittles Loki with a single word. And it also kind of separates this Loki from our own Loki, even subconsciously. We've never thought of Loki as Laufeyson. So it kind of gives us a different flavor on Loki just with a word. I thought that was just really good writing. You know, we've heard son of Bor. In the comics, we hear Bor son all the time, which is Odin. Odin is the son of Bor, Bor son. But you don't hear Laufeyson often. Occasionally in the comics, but I don't think we've ever heard it in the MCU. One of my favorite lines in the entire show was the two smells of Tony line. It's a quick line. As Loki is approaching the stand, he talks about he could smell two Tonys in 2012. So he was acknowledging that they were messing with time when he was messing with time in a single quick line of dialogue, while also giving us a little flourish with the Axe body spray moment in canon of Endgame. Tony probably wears a lot of cologne because that's the kind of character he is. There's an Axe body spray joke in one of these films with that Tony. So there is the option of Iron Man in continuity 2012 and Iron Man in Endgame continuity visiting 2012 having two different smells And Loki smelling two different Tonys is, one, a very funny line, two, something he would say to accuse the Time Variance Authority of not doing their job, and him knowing there were two Tonys, but also it gives us the knowledge that he is one of the most clever characters in the MCU. He was aware of everything going on, and he still ran with it and benefited himself. That's what Loki does. He benefits himself. That one line, beautiful. Beautiful. I love the rotating fonts for different variants. I think that's perfect. I think the rotating fonts give so much story. It's a great way to introduce the concept of variants. Also, I just personally love variant covers, variant characters. It isn't a necessary Easter egg, so I didn't put it in the Easter egg section, but variants are the things that separate the mainstream comic book from its variant covers. They're the same inside, but they look different on the outside. Essentially, the core is the same, but they have different variations on the outside. I think we're going to see a lot of that in this show. So calling them variants makes comic book fans go, oh, I get that, but also it's what they are. Having the variant fonts, one, it feels mischievous and it feels like the energy of Loki, but two, it kind of sets up what we're going to see with the character himself and all the different variations of him. We don't even know how many Lokis we're going to see, and that kind of teases that. I think that's a really great way to set up the show. The mundane use of Infinity Stones is genius as a power level up. We've talked about this a couple times, but I think it's really clever to show Thanos was the biggest bad for 10 years. Thanos was the guy that we were waiting to meet and see, and then we could not comprehend the power of the Infinity Stones. We couldn't begin to understand the scope of what he could do with those stones. It was a 10-year build, and then remember how much you felt in Infinity War when they came together? Remember the shock of seeing everything that thing could do? Because we had the individual stones, and then we had to play a time heist to get them together again. All of this was the biggest thing in these $300 million movies, the scope of which we'd never seen before. In a single visual, they said, okay, now we're over here. Phase 1, 2, and 3, that's this level of power. Now we're here. So in one moment, that for our eye line, our character that we're watching this universe through is Loki. Loki is a god to us. He's all-powerful, he's magic, he's mischief, he's mayhem, he's everything power. We cannot begin to fight him. He fought all of the Avengers. Loki was Phase 1's big bad. Thanos, Phase 3's big bad, literally broke Loki's neck, showing the new power structure. What better way to show Loki, our eye line, to sit down than opening that drawer and giving us the obsolescence of the Infinity Stones. Marvel does such a good job evolving while not having sequelitis. Marvel doesn't try to go just bigger than last time because Marvel is serialized. Marvel isn't a sequel, build and build and build. Marvel is this leads to this and this leads to this, but remember how much you love this because that's going to make you love this, and we don't need to remind you of this because you've already had this, and now you're over here with this, and these characters' arcs are so believable that you're invested enough that they don't need to remind you how much you love this. You don't need to be reminded with every movie why you love blank character. You already know. So what they can do is just make the stakes higher without rehashing. This episode is probably one of the biggest look at what just happened of any, but it didn't feel like a flashback episode because you already love the characters. They had to show us very little. They covered 12 years of movies in one sequence. But the reason that's important for the Infinity Stones is Phase 1 was about Loki, a literal god. Human beings interacting with gods for the first time. We are overwhelmed by the might of gods. Thor is real. Loki is real. How would mere humans, how would a guy with a bow handle gods? Phase 2 is about what happens when our reaction to gods is not acceptable. Think about Winter Soldier. We decide to point a gun at everyone just in case they make a mistake. Think about Age of Ultron. We build a robot to protect the world, but it gets corrupted by power, as all power does, and it actually tries to take us out. Everything in Phase 2 is about civil war. Everything's about distrust. So Phase 1 is about uniting together against an all-powerful thing. Phase 2 is about distrust, about how human beings kind of fuck up when they get power. Phase 3 then becomes uniting together again after crushing defeat at more than just gods. Cosmic entities, things we can't even imagine, are dabbled in Phase 3. Thanos crushing Loki is a moment of, hey, this one episode said, oh, that's cute. Hope you had fun. Let's dance. Phase 4 is going to be bananas. We got time travel. We got reality warping. We got all sorts of stuff that we can't even comprehend yet. And it did that all with one of the probably least expensive shots in the show. A drawer with some Infinity Stones in it. Told us, told Loki, told you, you're not in Kansas anymore or in Oklahoma. Genius! Cosmic power. I just wrote cosmic power. That was my note for that whole rant. That whole rant I should have written down. I didn't even think of breaking down phase 1 through 3. I wrote down 2 words, cosmic power, and that's how I feel about it. It hits me so much because we had the essence of cosmic tease. When Star-Lord in Guardians 2 wielded the stone and we got the taste of being a god and like he's a half god, we got the taste of cosmic. We're going Fantastic Four, we're going Silver Surfer, we're going to get Kang, we're going to land at Galactus, we're going to bring in mutants, we're going to mess with time, we're going to go all around with variants. Cosmic power, y'all. It's coming. Favorite line of dialogue in the show. Favorite single words to the point where it's the only line I think I wrote down word for word. The dialogue between Owen Wilson and Loki is Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston, Loki and Mobius. I should pick one. The dialogue between Loki and Mobius is some of the most beautiful. Every Marvel show has really impressed me with, we need time with these characters. The movies do a great job of being annuals. They do a great job of those beautiful one-page splash page spreads, but I love dialogue so I can invest in the character, so when the action happens, I give a shit. I think dialogue is much more important than action. I think it's one of the things that we're really losing in action movies is investment. If I don't care about the character, I'm out. For example, I think John Wick 1 and 2, we cared way more about John Wick than John Wick 3. They trusted us to just like him enough that the action took over. For me, John Wick 1 is a much better film, and I'm not insulting John Wick 3, but I think the investment in the character is so much more important. That's where it gets tricky as these movies grow and grow and grow. We still need those farmhouse moments in Age of Ultron. We still need to be invested in the characters. We need the scene where Cap wiggles Thor's hammer before he wields it later. That little skirt was so important. Those moments need to happen. I think some of the best moments in the MCU are when you have moments of dialogue that further the plot but also show you the scope of what the MCU is. This moment was about going inward. So we've had a lot of going outward. And WandaVision, the ship of Theseus, that's going inward. The speech that Sam gives about what America can represent made me want to love America so much. It's about what we can be, not what we are. That whole speech, all those are dialogue lines. They're not action moments, but they make you care about the characters. From Loki, the first and most oppressive lie ever uttered was the Song of Freedom. For nearly every living thing, choice breeds shame and uncertainty and regret. There's a fork in every road, yet the wrong path always taken. Heavy, bro. I do feel like a lot of people think that way. I think a lot of people think that choice is the antithesis of happiness. I disagree. I'm sure you disagree. But people, when they're depressed, people, when they feel wronged, when they're not in their right mind, as Loki often isn't, would see that. He thinks, through his own worldview, he thinks he's a benevolent ruler. He wants to take away choice and rule so people don't have choice because it allows for freedom. Ants in colonies that are just doing their job, some people think would be happier than those struggling under the weight of a giant rock, like Spider-Man. I would argue that choice is always worth it when you decide to win or learn. Win or learn is what I try to embody every day. Either you make the right decision or you make the wrong decision, you learn from the wrong decision. It's not win or lose, it's win or learn. There's always something to be gained from every failure. Failure is how you get strong, not success. You don't get strong from not going to the gym. You get strong from lifting things and putting them down. You get strong from adversity. You get strong from failure. When you're in the failure mindset, when you're under oppression, when you're under scrutiny from authority, or when you think you're right and you don't have conflict, then you think that freedom is a negative. You think that choice is negative because you aren't thinking about the other, you're thinking about yourself. Loki goes from selfish to altruistic in a scene. He sees the error in his ways through that sequence. He sees how he's been wrong, and he knows he's not a bad guy. And most importantly, Mobius knows he's not a bad guy. Mobius was able to see who Loki was more than Loki. One, because Mobius is wicked smart, but two, he's seen all the different timelines. He's able to look into what Loki can become. Mobius saves Loki because of who Loki is, regardless of who Loki acts. The way Loki's acting in 2012 is so much lesser than what Loki becomes. So in that single sequence of dialogue, Mobius is showing how much he knows about the way things can be, and that's why he's defending all of his decisions to grab things. I think that was a genius line of dialogue. It gave us all the things we needed to know about 2012 Loki, while also giving us a lot of information about shaping things to come. Genius work from Mobius, genius work from Owen Wilson, genius work from Loki, genius work from Tom Hiddleston. Love that line of dialogue. I'm very curious about the ramifications of Loki having to evolve, because we had 7 years of Loki evolving. We had Thor Dark World, where he made bad decisions. We had the ramifications of him losing his mother. We had the ramifications of his decisions going into Infinity War. We had the ramifications of how he chose to be wholesome and good in Ragnarok. The scene between Thor and Loki in Ragnarok, where Loki decides to be a hero, is vital. He had to make all of those changes in one sequence in 7 minutes versus 7 years. We're going to see some ramifications. We're going to see some whiplash. There will be moments where we see our Loki, our new Loki, this variant Loki, make bad decisions because he has evolved, but he's not fully evolved. So I think there's going to be some interesting ramifications. Also, what does that do to one's mind to see yourself die? What does that do to one's mind to see you make decisions that will haunt you forever? There's so many ramifications to that little blip of genius acting. I'm curious what it does to a mind to see your redemption arc versus live through the choices you make as a redemption arc. It's why I'd never want to go to the future. I don't want to see the decisions I grow to make because I need to earn them. I don't think you can learn how to be better through seeing a better version of yourself. I think failure is how you get better. So I think it's going to be interesting to see Loki not have his failures and just know about how he ends after his failures. That'll be intriguing. The show promises to be the insanity we thought WandaVision might herald. A lot of people were disappointed by the way that WandaVision left the sitcom world and then became more of a superhero show, but then it brought back the ship of Theseus, brought back very broad concepts. I personally think WandaVision is in the upper half of the 25 MCU mediums, 25 different properties within the MCU. I think WandaVision is in the upper half. I think they landed a very different thing than the show started, but I think it worked out in a very fun way. I think all of the wonkiness that people wanted WandaVision to go further and further, I think Loki is the furthering of all of that goodness. I think Loki's going to go the places people wanted WandaVision to go, and I think the MCU will be impossibly different in 5 weeks. I think this show, as much as having Sam Wilson become Captain America is vital, as much as Wanda becoming Scarlet Witch is vital, I think the way this show ends is going to change the entire MCU in a very interesting way, and we'll see how that goes. They talk about a sacred timeline and how giant events can get up. It's interesting that Loki was supposed to come out earlier, and Loki had to change its filming and all those things, so I was thinking like COVID-19 threw us off our sacred timeline, what we could have had and how things would be different, but also, arguably, we appreciated WandaVision more because we were in lockdown during it. Arguably, we needed Falcon Winter Soldier more because of the things that had happened. Not politically, I don't want to get into that because that'll be an hour-long show, but the things that happened in the year that they were filming Falcon Winter Soldier very publicly were things that we needed Falcon Winter Soldier more for. So it is interesting how life affects art and art affects life, and whether or not that sacred timeline would be as interesting. Would those shows be as good about dealing with trauma by watching TV to escape trauma while you're watching a show about trauma, escaping trauma? Would that be as interesting of a show, investment-wise? Would a show about someone who doesn't look like racist things should be Captain America taking on the mantle while people are trying to commit acts of treason and actually tear our democracy apart in real time be as impactful? I think sometimes the sacred timeline is wrong, and that's why the TVA are the bad guys. I'm thinking the TVA actually causes the multiverse of madness. I'm thinking the TVA is the reason we get the Doctor Strange chaos. I'm thinking the TVA is the reason that Spider-Man might have Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire in it. I think Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are a direct result of the TVA. I still maintain, even though they claim they're not in it, they will be, and I maintain that the Multiverse of Madness has to start from what happens in Loki. We saw the beginnings of it in WandaVision, but I think it accelerates in Loki, and I think Loki leads more directly into the Multiverse of Madness than we would have assumed. I think the TVA and perhaps Kang are really where things go Pete Tong very soon. Is President Loki good or bad? We don't know if that President Loki from the comic books and through the trailers that looks just like that comic book cover, good God, they did great work there. We don't know if that's a good Loki or a bad Loki. Also, Loki's going to make decisions based on Loki. Even though he's in a moment of redemption, there are going to be times where he is selfish. That's his character. So what President Loki are we going to see? Obviously, President Loki was a comic book that came out in 2016 as a commentary on the election of the time, and obviously you know my thoughts on which way I think that went, and I think it's really interesting to get a god of mischief that loves to hear himself talk and would hurt people for his own betterment as the president. What will that character look like in the MCU in a post-that guy world? How many will we see? How many variants are we going to see? Who will win? Which Loki is going to come out on top? What does the sequel show look like? Who will be the good Loki? Are there going to be other good Lokis that do more altruistic things than the Loki from 2012 that we have now? A lot of great questions, a lot of fun with season 1 and season 2. Will we get King Loki? Will we get Kid Loki? Will we get Young Avengers Loki? Will they introduce a teen Loki that might join the Young Avengers, since we have so many Young Avengers in the TV shows? We've introduced a Young Avenger in each of the shows. WandaVision gave us 2. Falcon Winter Soldier gave us 1. Will this one give us another Young Avenger? Is that going to be a weird trend where we assemble the Young Avengers with the strange Young Avenger teen Loki? Is that to come? Or, most importantly, will it be Matt Damon? That's the question. Matt Damon. All right, you lovelies. I just spoke real fast. I'm going to wrap this up. A wave of tired just hit me. I'll see you next week on Wednesday, 10 a.m., same bat time, same bat channel for Loki. Much love.